When you talk about Detroit's resurgence, Detroit's growth, what's next for the city, aside from education, there's no conversation more critical than investing in our workforce, creating opportunities for people who live in the city of Detroit. You hear announcements about companies like Sakti that are expanding their footprint, investing $30 million into an existing site and also building a training center. There are companies investing in the city. There are companies coming. What our job is to make sure that every single Detroiter has access to an opportunity to land those jobs that are really going to be the future of this city. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, a group of people who wake up every morning thinking about how we can expand opportunities, how we can make sure that we are building a talent pipeline and really investing in our workforce. And before I go too much further, I do have to thank JPMorgan Chase for the work that they're doing. And pretty soon you're going to hear from Chauncy, and he's going to talk about the study that they just commissioned that really gives us a sense of what the landscape in the city of Detroit is when it comes to workforce training, and really the opportunities and challenges. And it really provides a critical roadmap for us. So thank you very much, Chauncy, for the work that you and JPMorgan Chase are doing. All right, I'd like to introduce William Jones. He is CEO of Focus Hope. Pam Moore, someone who I work with very closely, have tons and tons of respect for, President and CEO of Detroit Employment Solutions. And Faye Nelson, Vice President of Public Affairs for DTE Energy and President of the DTE Energy Foundation. And Chauncy Lennon, Managing Director of Global Philanthropy for JPMorgan Chase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you all. You can stay out extra late tonight. I give you permission because you got up early this morning and made it here. So what I'd like to do is first we're going to roll a short video that talks about JPMorgan Chase's partnership with Detroit. Then I'm going to talk about some of the research we've recently commissioned. A copy of one of the reports is there on your table. And then we'll have a conversation with the panelists here. So why don't we start by rolling the video.
Detroit is a great, iconic American city.
There are many things that make Detroit great. I'd start first and foremost with its people.
Detroit people have grit. They are persistent. They have tenacity.
Tough, hardworking, but friendly.
We've been part of the Detroit community for 80 years. The future of Detroit is something that we have a vested interest in.
JPMorgan Chase is really on the leading edge of investing in Detroit's revitalization.
There are so many opportunities in this city.
Our values have always been to support your clients, support your communities. We don't see any conflict whatsoever in terms of doing both. So Detroit's critical to us. We've been there. We want to see it thrive. We want to see it grow. We happen to be a very big company, but we take it very personally that way. And here we're doing is not just philanthropy, it includes philanthropy. And that's helpful because sometimes philanthropy is needed, but it also includes things like community development.
This capital will help build charter schools, affordable housing, help small businesses and neighborhoods throughout Detroit.
We're taking abandoned houses in the city and we're auctioning them. And what JPMorgan Chase is doing is enabling people to get mortgages to move in.
What JPMorgan's investment in Focus Hope allows us to do is to train more students and to make certain that there's a birth to college pipeline for people.
In Detroit, we're actually bringing the full force of JPMorgan to bear. Philanthropy, technology, finance, community development, and we're doing all of that in the revitalization of Detroit.
Some of our money is going to help with the completion of a big project called M1 Rail, which is going to connect the Midtown and the downtown areas.
The revival is really taking place. The downtown and the Midtown area are really bustling.
We have huge numbers of young people moving into Detroit.
The bankruptcy is over. The street lights are being turned back on. Businesses are coming back in.
One of the things that I think is really exciting about this partnership with JPMorgan Chase is that they really did their homework.
They came in and spent a huge amount of time understanding the workings of the government, understanding the workings of the neighborhood and the business community. There isn't a day goes by that somebody isn't in my office with a plan for a new apartment building, a plan for a new business, a plan for a new office building. It's very exciting.
I hope it will spark other companies to follow us and make similar commitments.
This is aggressive stuff that the bank is doing, and we are most appreciative. This allows us to do what we do to fulfill our own mission and purpose.
If we can see small businesses created, people going back to work, neighborhoods filled again with families and children, that's going to be a great thing for Detroit, and it's going to be a great thing for all of us.
It'll eventually be an example of great American resilience.
All right, well, thank you. And as you heard, we focus very much on using data, really understanding a problem as part of our engagement and developing a strategy. And nowhere when it comes to workforce, that has been very much our approach as well. And so what I want to do now is talk about some of the research we've done recently on some of Detroit's workforce challenges to give us all a common frame of reference before we start having our conversation with the panelists. So let me move the slides ahead here. I want to go to the next slide, please. So I want to do three things. I want to talk first about the workforce in Detroit. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of opportunities we're seeing in the Detroit labor market. And then I'll end by talking a little bit about the kinds of system opportunities and challenges we're also seeing. So first, let's talk about some of the characteristics of Detroit's employed and unemployed residents. So one of the first things you see when you look at the data is that labor market participation in Detroit is less than in neighboring counties and compared to the nation as a whole. So the labor pool includes only 61% of Detroit residents aged 16 to 64. So that's 275,000 residents. So we have lots of folks who are out of the labor market. It's an important thing to keep in mind because as we're seeing now nationally, as economies improve, what you see is that people want to come back into the labor market. So this is not a static challenge. As things get better, we'll actually expect in some ways the workforce challenges to seem intractable because we'll have more people re-entering as current people who are looking for jobs find jobs. The second point is that working residents tend to earn low wages and work outside the city limits. So almost 1/5 of working Detroiters live in poverty, even though 31% of workers in poverty work full-time. Right? So this is a big challenge. People are working full-time and are not earning wages that get them over the poverty line. A second point to recognize is that Detroit residents tend to leave the city to find work, as their skill sets don't match those of skills required for many jobs in the city. This is true in other cities, but our research suggests that Detroit, this is a problem that is unrivaled. Detroit's, partly because of its the downward cycle of investment for many years now, you don't have a lot of the entry-level jobs that you often see in retail and customer service that are often people's first stepping stone into the labor market. So people are having to travel outside the city for many of these jobs. Let's go to the next slide. Low educational attainment rates are driving low labor force participation. Working Detroiters have higher educational attainment than non-workers. 18% of workers have a BA compared to 13% of all Detroiters and 7% of those not in the labor force. So it's important to recognize that there'll need to be more opportunities for people to gain skills and credentials as part of their reattachment to the labor market. And in general, unemployed Detroit residents have lower education and literacy skills. We can say more about that in the conversation, but this data is not as comprehensive as some of the other data, but this sample, I think, is reflective of the reality of the challenge. Let's go on to the next slide. Some final characteristics of the unemployed and unemployed residents. African Americans are twice as likely to be unemployed as whites. Men are more likely to be unemployed than women. Youth are more likely to be unemployed, especially the youngest workers have very high unemployment rates. So again, these problems are tough and tougher for many specific populations. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk about, that's the supply side, if you will. Let's talk about the demand side of this problem. Detroit has too few jobs. There are about 258,000 jobs for 706 residents. So there's only jobs for 37% of the population. Now this is a high level, this is kind of a gloss, but it is useful as a way to compare the challenge to other cities. And again, Detroit is unique in the challenge it faces when it comes to this ratio of population to jobs. And it has fewer jobs in the private sector than other cities, especially in, again, these very entry-level jobs in things like retail, accommodation, and food service. The skills required by Detroit's employers tend to be higher than in the surrounding areas, resulting in significant incommuting to fill jobs that Detroiters can't. So we see that 71% of jobs in the city are held by non-Detroit city residents, who tend to have higher educational attainment, more likely to be white, and earn higher wages. Again, this is a product and part of the fact that many of the entry-level, lower-skilled jobs are actually not in the city or outside of the city. When you look at other urban labor markets, you see a mix. And so, again, this is a unique challenge. Over time, this will shift as investment and the sort of retail presence in the center city grows. But for now, this is an important challenge. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, the report we shared with you on your table on the skills gap does contain some hopeful information. So when we think about the population folks who don't have high school degrees or just high school degrees, an opportunity often exists for these folks in what we call middle skill jobs. So middle skill jobs are jobs for people who have a high school degree, some post-secondary training and credentials, but not necessarily BA. And when it comes to middle skill jobs, we see that there are opportunities in the Detroit region. Middle skill jobs represent 17% of all jobs in the Detroit region, and that's about 320,000 positions. We see that there are going to be an increasing number of these positions over the next few years. Close to 10,000 middle skill jobs will be projected to open every year going forward. And many of these jobs will be in both the healthcare and manufacturing sectors. The job postings and anticipated retirements affirm a strong immediate demand for workers. So part of it is that these sectors will be growing. Part of it is that the incumbent workers in these sectors will be retiring. So the key point here just to say is that there's an opportunity right now for people who don't have BAs if they can get the high school credentials and some technical or other sector-specific training to fill these positions. And the data shows us that employers are struggling to fill these positions. Often these positions are staying open for longer than you would expect, or compared to other kinds of positions that are filling more rapidly. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'll just end here with a few words about what we see in terms of the system, what exists right now in terms of training opportunities for folks to get the skills that can get them into some of these jobs. So there is a need for a wide range of work readiness programming and skills training provided by the typical workforce development providers, as well as community and economic development organizations. So this is a big problem. We're going to need lots of different programs and service providers engaged in developing a solution. One thing we're seeing is that there's an increasing focus on career pathway models. So this reflects a practice across the country that simply placing someone in any job is not as effective as working with somebody to really identify a career opportunity that they want to aim for. And what we know across a lot of different training opportunities is that simply sort of a jobs-first approach does not work as well as helping somebody learn skills that are related to a sector and then enter into a sector where they have aspirations to move on to a higher skill, higher wage job. And what you see is many service providers are developing programs and services that are part of this community pathway, the career pathway approach. Let's move to the next slide. Now, there are deep complexities to aligning Detroit's workforce infrastructure to its industry mix and labor pool. And again, Detroit is not unique in this regard, but making sure that we get the demand side at the table, really signaling and articulating what skills they need so that the supply side, the training providers, the educators, the community colleges, can be smart about designing curricula, developing the skills that are linked to this demand. That's an ongoing challenge and one that Detroit will have to wrestle with like the rest of the country. And overall in Detroit, we see a range of the system's workforce partnerships are very complex. There are examples of strong partnerships, and there are a series of initiatives that are but these initiatives often are struggling for enough funding. Often the coordination is a challenge, and often they're not connected to each other. And this speaks to some of the data I've talked about earlier. You've got people with low skills. Sometimes they're not ready for some of the more advanced training. So how do you build programs that are sequenced, that let people develop a set of fundamental skills, that build to more advanced skills, that then give them a labor market traction? And then the size of the investment, our research suggests that there's about $119 million being invested on a yearly basis. 60% of that is federal funding, 12% is state, and the rest is coming from kind of philanthropic sources. So let me end there and turn now to our panel members and get them to respond to this data and their own experience working in the system. So I'm going to start with Pam. Can you, reflecting on the data that's just been shared and thinking about the role DESC plays, what do you think the biggest workforce challenges are right now for Detroit?
So there's several. Low education attainment is probably the most critical issue that we deal with. Because there are more and more middle-skilled jobs coming to Detroit, we don't have the workforce to fill those jobs. And as your data show, if you have less than a high school diploma, there are very few jobs for you in the city of Detroit, and so you have to go to the suburbs to find those low-skilled jobs. And so that brings up the transportation issue, which is our other huge barrier for Detroiters. Mayor Duggan is working on lowering our insurance rates. However, currently we just don't have reliable public transportation to get to the suburbs and back to even go and get that $12 an hour. So the challenge is the pipeline of talent for these jobs that are currently in demand, which for those that were in the session about education, you've heard the data on our public schools in Detroit, and so our pipeline of talent is challenged, not prepared properly. Literacy is a huge issue in the city of Detroit, and so it's a very big issue. But there are many of us, we're working better than we have in many years. There are many workforce agencies in the city of Detroit doing this work, but we are disconnected. We do need more bridge programs like Focus Hope has